Emina 38 na legislature ng Guam is back in session. Gentlelady from Zonia, you still have the floor.
So I was proffering an amendment to the amendment, but I'm going to withdraw that amendment, Mr. Speaker, because it was just going to make it an option to be sewer, but it was very clear in GWA and EPA that right now the current law allows for one dwelling on this half an acre property and the 19,200 square feet, and this amendment allowing us to switch to type 4 sewer for 2 dwellings on the same amount of property is pretty much doubling the density without requiring sewer. And they oppose it, Guam EPA opposes it, and GWA opposes it. So I'm afraid I'm gonna have to oppose it, although part of this does make it better. This part that doesn't require sewer is really kind of a back way in of allowing double density where they prohibit it right now.
So, ma'am, can you go ahead and motion to withdraw your, again? You said you wanted to not stop, can you?
Yes, so I'm gonna withdraw that amendment. I think it was passed out that has a double underline under the words or sewer. And again, that's just to protect our aquifer for all the long-term health of the people of Guam.
On the motion to withdraw the amendment to the amendment, any objections? No objections, so ordered. On the amendment, is there any other person who would like to speak to the amendment? As amended, actually. On the amendment as amended, Mr. Senator Duane, would you like to close?
Mr. Speaker, and to my colleagues, I hope they can join me in voting for this and ensure that this amendment can be put in. Mr. Speaker, I disagree with the assertion that this is any kind of back road. I believe this is exactly what was asked for. It was asked, and even decedent lots, which is 4 in 1 acre right now, can be serviced by type 4 systems. This is an ADU that can only be up to 900 square feet, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, only 900 square feet maximum on house lots 1/2 acre that more than likely are not in excess of 2,000, probably between 1,400 and 2,000 square feet. Common area over the GPZ in areas where 1/2 acre lots are being used. Once again, I have to go back to my example. So earlier it was mentioned that they don't calculate by the square footage. They do. Because, Mr. Speaker, the square footage is how they size your septic tank. They don't size all septic tanks to one size. They check the dwelling, and if you got 5 bedrooms or 6 bedrooms or 7 bedrooms in a 6,000 square foot home, which you can easily put on a 1/2 acre, they are gonna make that leaching field and that septic tank much larger. If you've got a 1,400 square foot house with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, where more than likely you won't have more than a family of 4 or 6, or maybe more because of the life the way it is right now. But the fact is, on a larger home, it's clear. You're gonna have more bathrooms, you're gonna have more people living in there, and that septic tank has to be sized to the size of the home you put on. So this is the same thing once again. For people who have a 1/2 acre lot over the GPZ that are wanting to put a 900 square foot. There's an option in this bill, 400 or 900. We lined out 1,200, we lined out 1,600. It's 400 or 900. So the maximum going on this 1/2 acre lot is gonna be 900 square feet, either attached or detached, attached or detached, and it will be serviced by the type 4 system. On top of that, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, the earlier amendment, and I want the people out there that are listening to know this, for all of you who know that you are within 200 feet of a sewer, or 50 feet of a sewer because of what GWA and EPA wants, which I'm fine with, you have to hook up to sewer before you can build an ADU. Mr. Speaker, that will increase greatly the revenue to GWA because now these will be paying customers to GWA. Wanted to mention one more thing. A lot of people are talking about appropriations and appropriations if we want to do this and we want more sewer in. How many millions right now exist in the system development charge? And I don't believe there's been 1 inch of sewer that's been built. We've heard GWA, we've heard EPA, we've heard CCU members go out there and tell us, you got to preserve that system development charge because everybody in the past paid for all the development that exists right now, and that's why we had to implement it. People are paying $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 for the system development charge when they're ever going to hook up a meter and hook up to sewer. Tay mamalaw hamzu na masangani na we're not paying. Ekunok magay. Ko unsete ke now? Konto na midzone. Mangagi pa ako gifan. Para ta pega i-infrastructure. Kalakas na masisigan suled sa salapi. So pega gi bangko para hafa interest. Tap mo. So I'm telling you, let's hold other people accountable as well. Okay? And let's once again, I cannot overemphasize, those 2,000 households. GWA and EPA have been wanting those 2,000 households in their own report to be on the sewer. And they have a law that they could do it right now. You know what they could do, Mr. Speaker? If they wanted to force those houses to go on to sewer, they could shut off their water. Go ahead and try. That's what the law calls for. So if you people want to really be true to your word about what you want to happen, get on up there and force them to do what they need to do. Get on up there and tell them to start using their money in the system development charge and build infrastructure. I just talked to somebody over lunch, and they were telling me that in their area, and they're going to go now and complain to GWA, on one of their family parcels that have been broken up, on one street, there's sewer already there. And just one street over, they haven't put anything in. And they have not been able to realize the highest and best use of their property. The same person said there's a GWA will on their property. I said, why haven't you gotten a lawyer and sued them? When I was up there at land management, Speaker, I had families coming in. One of the most predominant one was the one behind the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts up there in Upper Tumum. Probably for 4 decades. They just plunked that well down and said, Unasita hanum, tanok mo lo be usa. So you know what? Everybody step up to the plate. You want to put your money where your mouth is? Let's make everybody do their part. But this is fair. This is fair because it's fair. The only other fair thing to do, if we cannot pass amendments like this in this bill, is to shut down all development over the GPZ that doesn't have sewer. Otherwise, you are discriminating between those who are going to build a new house on a half-acre lot as dunkulu as they want to, and tell that other person on the other half-acre lot, tisi niya lai, unhatsa hindi kikit na ADU. Sano, tisi nun, hook up gisur. Good luck, and God bless you. Mr. Chair. I now make a motion to accept this amendment as proffered.
There is a motion. On the amendment, there has been an objection. On the motion, on the amendment that has been amended, all those in favor of the amendment as it has been amended, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. On the bill. On the bill. Are there any And the other senators wanting to? Gentlelady from Barragata, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon to my colleagues. So I do have a couple of amendments. I believe they've been passed out. So the first one I would like to proffer, I guess, is the one with a 948 timestamp. It states, so it's line 13 and 22, page 3. Okay, so what this amendment does, it adds who are legal residents. So this is the part of the bill that requires that a property owner live in one of the units. And it does state, so what I add to this is who are legal residents of Guam. And then I did move around that I still kept in the designated authorized representative. I know that, and during the testimony, I'm sorry, maybe I'll just go and describe the amendment first. Designated authorized representative means the person or persons designated by the property owner or owners to the Department of Land Management who are responsible for managing the property only in unforeseen hardship circumstances that prevent the continued occupancy of the primary dwelling unit or the accessory dwelling unit. And then it goes on to define what an active military deployment means. And it's basically copies what's in federal law. It's in 10 U.S. Code, Section 991, and I'll just read it out loud because this is the language. So what an active military deployment means is a member of the armed forces who, pursuant to orders, is performing a service in a training exercise or operation at a location or under circumstances that make it impossible or infeasible for the member to spend off-duty time in the housing in which the member resides when on garrison duty at the member's permanent duty station or home port, as the case may be. B, in the case of a member of a reserve component who is performing active service pursuant to orders that do not establish a permanent change of station, the housing referred to in paragraph A is any housing, which may include the member's residence that the member usually occupies for use during off-duty time when on garrison duty at the member's permanent duty station or home port, as the case may be. C, for the purposes of this section, a member is not deployed or in a deployment when the member is performing service as a student or trainee at a school, including any government school, performing administrative guard or detail duties in garrison at the member's permanent duty station. 3, unavailable solely because of hospitalization of the member at the member's permanent station or home port or in the immediate vicinity of the member's permanent residence, or disciplinary action taken against the member, and to allow legal and clerks to make technical corrections. And so the purpose of this amendment, so I know during the public hearing, Deputy Director Esteves mentioned that he had concerns about the designated authorized representative, and he said it would be a potential loophole. In this case, I did retain it, but for flexibility reasons in case the owners are hospitalized or incapacitated due to unforeseen hardship circumstances. And then the other recommendation he had was to define what active military deployment is. So what are the terms in which what is considered active military deployment? And so that's what this amendment does. It addresses, I guess, some of the issues that were raised during the public hearing. And so I'd like to proffer this amendment for consideration by the body. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. On the amendment, good Senator, good gentleman from 20, you're recognized.
Just to make it short, Mr. Chair, I believe this is discriminatory and not the right thing to do. I object to the amendment.
Thank you. On the amendment, are there any others wishing to speak? On the amendment? Therefore, would the author of the amendment? Author willing to close on the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this is not discriminatory in any way. In the original bill, or even in the amended bill, it states, except in unforeseen hardship circumstances, including but not limited to active military deployment or serious illness. So what this amendment does, it makes clear, using the federal standards, of what an active military deployment is. And so we want to be sure that you know, I guess addressing the potential loopholes where, you know, if a member, we've seen where members are deployed to, what is it, the THAAD station here in Guam. And so, you know, that clearly is, you know, I think it's fair to say that that should not be an exception because they're here. But unless they're deployed elsewhere, of course, that is considered an opportunity for to have either their family members or a designated authorized representative to be in that in either one of the units. And so again, this was something that was stated in the public hearing, is that in order to protect these properties, to make sure that they are helping the local population address the affordable housing problem, or the critical shortage of housing here in Guam, that we want to make sure it's available for people here. And that was one of the considerations, or at least the recommendations by, I believe it was Mr. Lamarena, who stated that he felt that that was important to ensure that it's, you know, we need to build the housing stock for people here in Guam. And, you know, it's really allows for flexibility. And one of the things, you know, we have to be, one of the things that really exacerbates housing here is the speculative market, where, you know, this, we're seeing more and more people that are buying property that perhaps they don't intend to live here, but they intend to make money off of it. And unfortunately, what we're experiencing is that, you know, with the overseas housing allowance, which is 2,000 and up, right? Our local people cannot compete for those rents. And we want to be able to, you know, I think I've heard from experts say that it's not enough just to build, increase housing stock. We need to build it for the local population. And so what this amendment does, it retains the requirement that an owner must occupy either one of the units. But it also allows for flexibility and allows for clarity. The flexibility in the case of an unforeseen hardship, and it offers the clarity of what is defined as active military deployment, again, in response to what was testified at the public hearing. So this is a reasonable amendment, and it really builds off of what was presently there. And I ask for my colleagues' support. Zuzu's Masi.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, there has been an objection. All those in favor of the amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Senator Perez, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the next amendment that I have is time-stamped 9:54 a.m., lines 23 to 27, and then semicolon lines 1 to 27, semicolon 1 to 10, and then page 3 to 5. And it's to amend section 61141B 5 and 10. It's pretty self-explanatory. So what I'm adding to this part of this section, again, in response to what was testified, basically 5, it adds, following an assessment by the Department of Public Works that confirms there is adequate space for street parking in the area, so that's in the subsection 5. And then if you go down to subsection 10 on the next page, it states, at the time of application for a building permit, the applicant shall first obtain written confirmation from responsible agencies, including Guam Water Works Authority, and it adds Guam Power Authority, and then Guam EPA and the Department of Public Works, that wastewater treatment and disposal, water supply, power infrastructure, so this was added, power infrastructure, off-street parking space, and access roadways are adequate to accommodate the accessory dwelling unit. So again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. One of the issues was perhaps overcrowding on the streets because of an ADU, and to have DPW assess it. And this was at the recommendation by Deputy Director Esteves. I think, you know, anyone who is living near this type of development would be concerned about losing their parking space, or, you know, being crowded out of their spaces that they are used to seeing or used to having. And it's important to have that, I guess, assessment being done. So I ask my colleagues for their support for this amendment.
Mr. Speaker,
Thank you.
point of order. Can we bifurcate the amendments? Page 1 and then the second page, just separate them and treat them separately.
So where do you want it, Barb?
On the 2 different pages would be fine.
Okay, let's just make sure that we're on the same one. This is Senator Paris, this is the one timestamp 954? Senator Tulay? You want to, first off, Senator Paris, is this the amendment that we're addressing right now, timestamped at 954?
That is correct.
Thank you. Senator Tulay, you still want to bifurcate this? There is a motion, a request to bifurcate this. Okay, there's an objection. Okay, all those in favor of bifurcating this motion between pages 1 and pages 2? Okay, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. On the amendment, good Senator from Tamuning, you're recognized.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chair. I appreciate some of these efforts that are being made, but I want to be clear. The bill already has all of these requirements in it. Our code is very durable as well in terms of going through the process. Mr. Chair, right now, people are reporting that it's taking 6 months minimum, sometimes 9, sometimes a full year to get a building permit for a new home. Not even having to worry about whether it's an ADU, whether it has to have a type 4 system, whether there's hoops and rings and trampolines to be jumped on. So I believe this amendment, while maybe well intended, is just going to add more confusion, more certifications to a permit process right now that is in disarray. And that's being generous. Time and time again, on the REMAX program that they run on KUAM, they go through the problems and the situations that exist within this crazy expensive market to build even just a small single-family dwelling. Some have testified that they put in a building permit And by the time they were going to build the house, the contractor had quoted them $320,000. 1 year later, that had ballooned by $100,000. And that same home that they could have built a year ago is now 100 grand more, and the interest rate is higher. Most of those people just walk away from that. They can't afford it. If we can't even do that, and as complicated as this is going to be already adding it to the permitted use, I just see this as another onerous set of loopholes that don't strengthen the bill, just reinforce what the government should be doing already. So for that reason, I object.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, gentlelady from Tamuning, you're recognized.
Si Diyos Masi, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of this. This is, of course, the one stamped 9:54 a.m. right on the top left.
9:54 a.m.
Yes, okay, just making sure. But I know this is the one definitely I was concerned about because of, you know, the lack of parking. Mayors are having difficult time ensuring that there's safety in their streets because if the cars are all lined up, it's very difficult to see, you know, kids running across the street, or if there's a dog or cat going. I mean, many times with the overcrowdedness of streets, it becomes very unsafe for our community. And this is very important because it's not a loophole. Because what's going to happen is we allow this and we don't address this issue today, we're going to be right back here in this session again, now changing the law because there's a problem. Or even worse, somebody gets seriously hurt from this. We need to stop, you know, creating legislation that are reactive and be more proactive. We can see that this is a safety problem. We know it's not there, but that's okay. Let it go until someone gets hurt. This is wrong. And it's very simple. Following an assessment, the Department of Public Works confirms there's adequate space for street parking in the area. Now, what if this was your property on your street, where it's hard enough to find parking just in your garage? You're having people come over to visit you. They can't because there's nowhere for anyone to park. You could barely get that one car of a family of 4 people, the husband, wife. How many cars? Everybody usually has about 2. But now it just makes it very, you know, unaccommodating for the people living there currently today, people who have homes today. Let's not wait until a safety issue comes up to have to come back here to address it. So other than that, I stand in full support of this safety measure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, ma'am. On the motion, on the amendment, anybody, gentleman from EPAN?
Yeah, point of inquiry about the timing. Is it being reset with every speaker? Just to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can proceed, sir.
Hey, Si Diyos Masi, Mr. Speaker, and buenas noches to the people of Guam. I don't think it's onerous to do the due diligence and to ensure that if we're going to allow these ADUs, that we're not going to turn our islands, villages into shanty towns. You know, this is a big problem in Hawaii with the ADUs and the parking. So I actually think it's common sense to, you're going to build an ADU, get a single parking spot. And for DPW to confirm there's adequate space for street parking in the area, I think is absolutely reasonable. The retiring speaker, the good gentle lady from Tamuning, had said, what if this was your property? But I would say, what if you were a neighbor to a property and they built an ADU and there wasn't any parking, and then, you know, we're gonna end up parking on the street, parking in the jungle, They're gonna take your parking, you have to park 5 miles away from where you're living. So I think that when we don't do things like this, that's how our zoning and our villages get all mentalapun. That's why it's all because we're not doing these simple regulations that they're gonna do everywhere else. So I think it's completely reasonable. I also think it's reasonable to include GPA on the sign off, because what we're doing with this bill is in greatly increasing the density of our residential areas. We are also creating a great strain on our infrastructure, and the bill doesn't have anything here that really addresses the increased strain on the power and the water, let alone the parking. So I think it's reasonable. You know, I could read the room with the objection, but I would again just ask that my colleagues really consider actually what the amendment does and not who is proffering it or who is speaking in support of it. Because again, to ensure that there's adequate parking, that's just kind of common sense to a lot of people out there. I mean, look in Agotnia, look at our parking situation here. They should have done this in Agotnia because, whew, boy, let me tell you, we're definitely getting our steps in. Sidus Masi, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. On the amendment, Gentlelady from Jonia, you're recognized.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Speaker. I support the amendment. It really just makes clear, it actually adds just very few words. On page 2, it's adding to Guam Waterworks and Guam EPA, Guam GPA. That's what's added, Guam Power Authority, as an entity responsible for reviewing these things prior to issuing the permit for the ADU. Very reasonable, and not sure why that was excluded. And then in the same paragraph, it talks about what they're going to review, and the bill already lists things that they're going to review, including wastewater treatment, water supply, access roadways to accommodate the ADU. And this amendment simply adds that they're also going to review power infrastructure and off-street parking space. So I feel like this does no harm to anyone. It's in line with the intent of the bill, and it actually helps them. So there's no confusion, like were we trying to exclude somebody or not? So we're not trying to exclude anybody to my knowledge, so listing them just makes it clearer. On page 1 of the bill, it's a different amendment. It talks about DPW checking adequate space for street parking in the area. I don't know if you have the same experience as I do, that there's a lot of places that are absolutely relying on street parking for their homes, their businesses, as opposed to providing that parking, right? And we have laws that mandate adequate parking, but they're really taking advantage. So I like this amendment. It's going to assure DPW that they're going to go out there and that we're not going to be creating havoc in these very already tight neighborhoods, such as, you know, the planned unit developments in Dedido, like Liguan Terrace. They're already tight, and we're going to allow ADUs. We know they're using the street parking, so this will just simply allow DPW to assess it and make sure that it's adequate for the occupancy that's predicted for that ADU. These ADUs, again, they're going to be rented out. And if they're going to be rented out, that means these are not necessarily family that's going to be coming to your ADU. So I think this is reasonable that neighbors are going to be considerate of neighbors, and that the DPW is going to help them to ensure that there is adequate space. Jesus Masi, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, gentleman from Jigo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just trying to understand we're talking about ADUs that have to be on half-acre lots. You know, in most easements where they have half-acre, the easement is 50 feet, okay? And if I was gonna put an ADU in my unit, it's like like a rental apartment. You identify to your tenants how much space and how much parking space you have. I shouldn't have to go to land management or public works to determine that. When there's the part of the permit process, they'll tell you how much space you have. So to put this in law is like, let's double the work of public works, where they have nothing else to do but count out parking stalls. And then we go down to GPA on the second page of this amendment. We're gonna add GPA. If you have a house, you have the power hookup, if you're adding an ADU, all they're gonna do is get an electrician to add it on to that same meter. And if you need another meter, then you get with GPA and you gotta get a permit to allow the meter. But you need a master electrician. So to add all these stuff, I object to this. I don't see any need for this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Go ahead and state your point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is ADUs, not just on half an acre, but it says in the law that it allows ADUs where there's sewer system. So ADUs are not just for areas that just use septic tanks, they're for every home. And if you have a sewer hookup already, it allows you to do it. And many of those are in these divisions that have these sewer hookups to allow the ADUs. So yes, it does get crowded. The area does get crowded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Senator, you.
Mr. Speaker, point of information. I lived in Deaddo, quarter-acre lots. And if they're gonna add ADUs, I know for a fact those people are gonna tell them, you only got room for one car, live with it and have a nice day. And they move on from there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know what quarter-acre lot looks like.
Thank you very much. On the amendment, any other senator willing to speak? No other? Senator, good senator from Barragata, you want to close?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, so I know in the bill it states that the ADU shall comply with environmental impact requirements in public laws, Guam administrative rules and regulations, Guam law, federal law. And so really it's reinforcing that. And yeah, it just makes, GPA definitely, whenever there's some construction, new construction, they're brought in to look at the unit to make sure that the grid is not being overwhelmed. And if this bill, as it is going, the scenario could happen where you can have up to 6 units in an acre and multiply that by how many acres there are, because right now the bill currently states that it allows for two ADUs for agriculture and R2 zones. And so I know the amendment that was just passed by the sponsor of the bill basically stated that to have an ADU, you'd have to have a minimum lot size of almost half an acre. And so if you just combine all that information together, potentially if you're looking at a full acre, you can have 6 lots in 1 acre. And you multiply that by how many acres there are in Guam, right? So that cumulative impact will impact the utilities. It will, both GPA and Guam Water Works. And so it's important to put GPA back, to highlight GPA in there, yeah, to make sure that the power grid is stable for us existing customers. And if you look at the other parts of the bill, the ADU, it says, the following agencies are required to service lots with ADUs, and it includes EPA, Guam Water Works, and there should be adequate fire protection in writing. So there has to be approval from the Guam Fire Department as well. And so, I think having GPA there is a good proactive measure, and it helps to assist with that assessment, whether fire protection Because one of the things that can come from overloading a circuit is potentially a fire. So I think GPA, putting GPA in there, ensuring that power and parking, these are all good governance, good planning, urban planning. It's just a common sense information. It reinforces what's already in the bill, I know, but by leaving it out, it leaves a question as to should they be there. So it just makes it very clear. And I ask for my colleagues' support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the amendment, there has been objection to the amendment. So if all those in favor of the amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Senator Parrish, you still have time.
Okay, the next amendment is timestamp 10:05 a.m. It's lines 13 to 17, page 9. It modifies section 61145, reporting requirements. And so in this one, basically, it would require that upon submission of application for an ADU, the head of household shall inform the mayor of affected municipality, rather than upon the completion of the building of an ADU. So again, these are proactive measures for the community and especially the mayors who are going to be in the front lines of these things, so that they plan properly. Again, I think that it's important to have your neighbors have a say in, or at least can have an eye on what's going on, and if there are any potential issues that can be addressed prior to it being built, I think that would save more in the long run than having to address it after the fact. And too many times in Guam, we have developments that are done, they're not properly, there's no foresight into the impacts to the neighbors, and developers are long gone before any kind of corrections are made. Case in point, stormwater drainage. Because of certain developments, the stormwater runs into a neighboring property, and that has been a huge problem on Guam, only to be exacerbated by our typhoons that come through here. And so it's a more, again, a proactive measure to protect the community and also support ADU. Suzuts Masi.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, stamped 10:05 a.m. Good Senator from Tamuning. And then
Once again, Mr. Chair, I object to this amendment. I think this is not conditional use. This is, if it becomes law, is a permitted. It is a permitted. And by saying permitted, it means getting your permit. Which means when you get your permit, you go through all of the regulatory agencies before you build to ensure that it's stamped for code and for all of the laws of Guam. And so if you were conditional use, yes, you have to go put a sign up, notice to rezone, notice to whatever, notice to whatever you're going to do. So once again, I don't think that it's an obligation to go and report, but yes, report when it's complete, because you want to let the mayor know, that this is done. It's not, you wouldn't want an unfinished building or something that looks like it's done and doesn't have a occupancy permit. Those kind of things. That's when you go report, because of the fact that already it's complete, you've got occupancy, and you've met all the requirements. So once again, I just think it's unnecessary. This is not conditional use. This is permitted use, so therefore I object to the amendment.
thank you, Senator. Gentlelady from Tamuning, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like the other amendment that we tried to proffer, this is about getting your community involved, your neighbors, letting them know what's going on, and definitely your village mayor to let them know as well. This is what we're doing. We're adding on an ADU to our home. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, people don't always, collaborate with their neighbors or talk with them, that they see them walking in and out, going to work, and that's pretty much it. And then you see something that's being built on their property. And you're wondering, you know, I wonder what that is. So what better place than go to your mayor and saying, hey, mayor, I see this neighbor who's building something on their property. Are they, you know, do you know what this is? What's going on? And usually your mayor will tell you. They're well versed. You know, every village has a mayor who tries to get involved with their community, goes to their church, listen to what's happening in their village, so they can tell other constituents in their village what's happening. So it's as simple as that person saying, oh, mayor, what's going on there? And the mayor says, oh, they're building an ADU. And that's it. The senator just spoke about, from Tumuning, spoke about zone changing. Guam Land Commission requires putting up signs whenever there's a zone change. But it's not going to happen in this. You don't have to put up a sign for zone changing, but you do have to put up that your building permit. Those need to go up. But it doesn't have to go as far as all the loopholes that you have to, or the bureaucracy of trying to get a building up. But at least you can notify your mayor. This is what's going on. This is what we're building. There is nothing wrong with that. I wish somebody would tell me in this hall if there's something wrong with being able to go to your mayor's office and saying, Mr. Mayor, I'm building an ADU unit, or I'm going through the process and the application, just to let you know. So that if you're driving by my house and you see some people out there that might not, you're thinking, oh, what are they doing there? I've never seen them before. It's okay, because I'm going through the process of an ADU unit. There is nothing wrong with notifying our mayors for that. They appreciate that. So they can answer the questions of their constituents who come to their office to ask them, what's going on here? Is this proper? Is this okay? It avoids a lot of arguments, neighbor fighting, especially neighbors getting into fights. Again, it's being proactive. And regardless, you're getting, let's say, League One Terrace, you know how tight those houses are. Some areas has a little more room to add an AD unit on that. Maybe might not have the parking, because everybody who's ever driven down League One Terrace and tried to find parking on the street, it's very difficult. But you can actually see who is legitimately having an AD unit in that area too, as well. So when mayors are driving by and they see something that's being built that they don't know anything about, it makes it difficult for them to do their job. If they don't have to go up there and investigate, excuse me, you're building something here, are you supposed to be here? I mean, there could be all kinds of situations. But it's just disheartening, because I'm standing up here trying to put some sense into my colleagues to tell them this is not going to hurt anything, but to allow our mayors the respect that's due to them, to let them know that this is going on in their village. It's as simple as that. There's no bureaucracy, there's no loopholes or hurdles to do that. Send an email. See the mayor at church. Let him know or her know. It's as simple as that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, ma'am. On the amendment, anybody else wishing to speak? Gentleman from Ipan, you recognize.
Sijos Masi, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I just want to take a moment to thank the hardworking mayors of the island. Sijos Masi for your hard work, and I don't get the objection to the amendment. It's actually the neighborly thing to do. It doesn't require that you do any backflips or somersaults. Just, tell the mayor, boy, mayor, in case you're wondering what's going on here, we're building one of these little duendes houses. And that's it, duende's house. So I don't get the objection to it. I think the mayors deserve to know, and it just saves the trouble of some other villager going to the mayor and say, "Hey, do you know what's going on over at Jose's house?" And it's just nice to tell the mayors. They should be informed, and it's so easy. It could be verbal, it could be an email, it could be in writing. I mean, there are many ways to inform the mayor of the affected municipality, but I think it just kind of gives that deference to the mayors and a little bit of respect just to the community as a whole. I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing that information. You know what I mean? I think we need to talk to each other more, and we need to be more neighborly, and we need to talk with our mayors in the villages. So I absolutely support this amendment, and I disagree with the notion that it somehow makes the process more difficult. Mr. Speaker, Sijos Masi.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, anybody else wishing to speak on the amendment? General Lady from Zonia, you're recognized.
Sijos Masi, I support the amendment as well. It's really the only change is instead of on completion of your building, your ADU, you're going to let the mayor know at the beginning of your construction when you submit your application. And these applications are going to be reviewed on a very fast-track process. So there's really not that much time difference except for construction time that we're talking about. And that would allow the mayors to be able to answer questions as to what's going on. Have we rezoned this property? No, we didn't. It's still an R1, but they're allowing an ADU in it. And really, if I recall correctly, this provision came from the Hawaii ordinance. So when we were able to substitute the bill in the committee, we included a lot of the ordinances from Hawaii because of their experiences. And one of them was that, mayors in the area, they're familiar that this is a single family house, this one is an apartment. They have an idea of who lives there or how many people live in there. And this is when it says, this is to facilitate better governance through safety, community planning, data population tracking. That's because people had died because no one knew they were back there in that accessory unit. And this is really that. It's so that if there's any problems, the mayor's another person in this village who's going to know that there's somebody living back there. That's not a storage house, that's not a back kitchen, that someone lives there. Please, let's get them out when there's a fire, when there's an emergency, when the ambulance has to get in. And that's why in another provision of the bill, ambulances have to be able to get into these ADUs. That's one of the other guidelines from Hawaii that we were able to put in. So I don't see, I like the amendment because it just gives extra heads up to the entire neighborhood through the mayor. And I don't see any harm in it, in waiting until the completion of the ADU. That's a very minimal requirement, so this just allows them to give earlier notice, that's all. And I think lets everybody keep track of what's going on in their villages better, and lets everyone keep track of their population and keep them safe. That's the goal.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Any other senator willing to speak on the amendment? No others? Senator, would you like to close?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the comments of the retiring speaker. Yes, it's really to help mayors to better organize their municipality to ensure that the emergency services reach any person inhabiting that dwelling. But also, it really strengthens what's already written in the bill. The bill states, this is to facilitate better governance through safety, community planning through village population, data tracking, zoning compliance, etc. So I think this strengthens at the intention of what this section aims for. And I just ask for my colleagues' support. Thank you.
Thank you. There has been an objection to this amendment. So all those in favor of the amendment as proffered, please indicate by raising your right hand, your hand. Motion fails.
And before I move to the next amendment, I'd like to append a testimony that was provided by one of the board of directors of Guam EPA, Stephen Hollister, in opposition to this bill. And it's in the drive for members to review. Moment's recess for members to see it.
Let's take a moment, Jesus. We're back in session. Senator, with regard to your request to be able to append a letter that's been brought in, first off, that doesn't give us time to be able to validate the veracity and validate where it's coming from. And so therefore, I'm not going to be able to accept it. I rule I'm not going to be able to accept it. On the bill. You still got 40 seconds left.
So this one's really quick. Basically, it's on 10 a.m., 10:01 a.m. amendment timestamp. And what this amendment does, it amends section 6141B15. And so the concern that Guam EPA had was to automatic approval without discretionary review. And really this undermines the purpose of a regulatory body, that they should be, allow that option to review. It also extends 60 days to 120 days. I think this is a pretty common timestamp for regulatory bodies, such as like the Guam Historic Preservation Office. They're given 120 days, I believe, to either approve or deny any kind of permit. So this is something I ask for the support of my colleagues. It also does make changes in the last part where it's just language changes in regards to when a permit is denied, basically that the agency would provide a notification to the applicant regarding the denial with citation of specific law, rule, or regulation necessary for the application's approval. And so this is the amendment that I'd like to proffer to the body for their consideration and support. Thank you.
Senator, I'm going to go hold the clock for you. Which amendment are you referring to?
This is timestamp 10:01 a.m., line 13 to 27, lines 1 to 9, page 6 to 7.
Okay, let's hang on. I don't have a copy of that right now. Take a recess. All right. Back in session. This is the amendment, 2 pages, timestamp, 10:01 a.m. Okay, on the amendment, gentleman from Tumuning, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair. So several things I have an issue with on this amendment. The amendment actually, the bill, when it was written, was designed for the review process, which doesn't stop, Mr. Chair, the permitting process. So just because it's 60 days doesn't mean that the owner goes out now and gets the contractor, breaks the ground, starts building. The review process is review to make sure that it comports to what's going to be passed in the law. 60 days should be adequate for that, but my biggest problem with this is actually on the back page, on page 2. The original language that's going to be in the law would say this: after the 60-day daytime period described in this subparagraph, return in writing a full set of comments to the applicant with a list of items that are defective or deficient and a description of how the applicant can be remedied, things can be remedied by the applicant. This was put in the bill to make sure that if there is some conflict in terms of how the owner believes that they should qualify and that they have an appeals process, basically. The new language that's inserted here is a notification to the applicant regarding the denial of the permit with citations of the specific law, rule, regulation necessary for the application's approval. You know, sometimes this stuff can be, depending on who's reviewing it, discretionary. And, you know, we're hearing that a lot, even on the major projects that are going on right now, even on the Milcon projects. They're asking for a special review for EPA to beef up their review because hundreds of millions of dollars a lot of times are being held up on those kind of projects. And can you imagine in this situation when you don't have the ability, you basically have no appeal when the 60-day review went in, and then when you want to go back and say, hey, how can I remedy this situation that you identified? But if they just get this stamp, 65.8 says blank, you're done. It's denied. I don't agree with that, and that's why I think everybody should have an appeals process, and that's what the original language of the bill is. So for that reason, I have an objection to this amendment.
Thank you. Any senator on the amendment? Any else wants to speak on the amendment? Thank you. I'll allow you a little bit of time. You want to speak? General, ladies and gentlemen, you're recognized.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Speaker. I stand in full support of this amendment. This amendment is exactly what EPA has asked for. This amendment would make the bill consistent with what EPA says that they can handle to review for ADUs. And EPA is in favor of ADUs, especially if there is sewer, especially if they're not over the aquifer. When they're over the aquifer and we have to do septic tanks, according to the bill, EPA is going to have to do other things. So all they have asked is to extend this 60 to 120 days. I think that's reasonable for EPA's review if it's necessary. And this actually is the building permit and all approvals. That's what the language says. So the author is disputing with me that that's not what it says, but it says on subsection 15, a building permit and all approvals required for an ADU unit shall be considered and approved ministerially without discretionary review. That's what the original bill says. So thankfully, this amendment is changing ministerially without discretionary review. I'm not even sure what that means. That means the agencies have no discretion to say, that's not in compliance. And it now very clear, it says if they meet all
Point of
requirements
information,
of
point of
applicable
information,
laws,
Mr.
rules,
Chair.
and regulations.
Exactly. So it says, if they meet all requirements of applicable laws, rules, and regulations, which is the permitting process.
That's correct.
You're not gonna circumvent that in 60 days. You're gonna be approved, but you're still gonna have to get your permit.
That's exactly why that is the language being added by this amendment. We want to be sure that they must meet the requirements of applicable laws, rules, and regulations. Who has an objection to that? That's what we want these agencies to approve based on, not based on this ministerially without discretionary review. It's too vague. It doesn't tell them what exactly they're supposed to be doing, and we're going to be tied up in chaos. So this is very clear. Do we want them to comply with rules, laws, and regulations? Yes. So that's all this amendment's going to do in that one sentence. And then it changes from 60 days of review for EPA, especially. They have specifically asked 2 times, and now again by a letter from one of their board of directors separately, that 60-day is too short for them. And I can see that it would be too short where there are no sewers over the aquifer, which the bill allows right now. And then this bill, as written, gives this, if they don't approve or deny within 60 days, it's deemed approved. That line is stricken out, so there's no default approval, but it still requires them, EPA and all the agencies, to do their thing within 120 days, or they must give notice. And I actually think this amendment makes it so much better for those who are applying, that instead of telling you what's defective or deficient and a description of how you can remedy that application, they're going to tell you with a citation of the specific law, rule, or regulation necessary to comply with for approval. It's very specific. That makes it really less discretion as opposed to, here's the rule. It's not that I don't like it to be left or right or this big or that big. It's, this is the rule, comply with this rule. Very clear, very consistent application between one applicant and the other. And that's what we want in our building process, just to keep it consistent. Make all of those who apply be treated the same. And we're already, by the bill, going to allow ADUs. This is increasing the density, over doubling the density of houses where right now we have strict density laws. How many houses can be on a thing? By doubling it, we are taxing our aquifer, we are taxing our resources. This just gives these agencies a little bit more time, from 60 to 120 days. 60 is 2 months. Very, very, very short. You know, the construction cannot take place that fast. 120 days is much more reasonable. And that doesn't delay all the problems that people might want to cite for the building process, the building permit process. Yes, we all agree it's taking too long, but this still puts a requirement down for 120 days maximum. That's it. That's far less. That's 6 months at the most. And hopefully these agencies can comply if they comply with the law. Easy. Sizus Masi. So I support this amendment full-hearted.
Thank you. Any other senator wanting to speak on the amendment? Any other senator? No other senator? Gentlelady from Barrigado, I'll give you the opportunity to close.
Sizus Masi, Mr. Speaker, and you know, in talking to US EPA, they're very clear that when an applicant applies for something, it is not their duty to tell the applicant how to meet the regulation, but it's their duty to say this is what is not in compliance. So they need to take that separate role of being the regulator versus the consultant, right? So that there's a conflict of interest where I just wanted to address that point in the last sentence because they're breaking conflict of interest by doing that. And this is much more direct and consistent. And again, you know, we just heard from the sponsor of the bill that even military buildup projects are they take a long time to have to review them. And so we're talking about increasing development through ADUs. 60 days is definitely not enough. On top of all the military buildup projects, on top of everything that is happening on this island, 60 days is impractical and almost, I would say, impossible, which is why I proffered this 120 days, because that is a commonplace timestamp for regulatory bodies on this island with a huge amount of development taking place. And so I appreciate the comments of the retiring speaker to share that these are, again, reasonable changes to the bill. And it doesn't detract from the bill, it actually strengthens the bill. I mean, this bill is proposing ADUs in a certain fashion. And so if we are to be right with this decision, for all of us in this body to feel right about this decision, I think it's important to include these amendments to make it better for our people and not just for the few. You know, I don't believe in ADUs at all cost to our health, or all cost in regards to the environment. You know, sustainability is about looking at the long term. And if we want this ADU experiment to work, we have to look at the whole picture and mitigate any impacts if we want to make this exist for the long run. Again, we are not only talking about housing, but housing that protects our environment, it protects the health of our people. And that is what many of the measures, these amendments that I'm proffering, do. And it will support economic development. Suju's Masi.
Thank you very much. On the amendment, there has been an objection. Therefore, all those in favor of the amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Colleagues, we have exhausted all amendments for the bill. Sponsor of the bill, would you like to close? My apologies. There is one more that has to be dispensed. Gentlelady from Zonia, I apologize. It's on the main motion.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of information, please. Can you allow me? I just want to ask where.
Sure.
I know that we've been working on a plethora of amendments, but on the main motion, can we still get to that? There's some of us.
I looked around and I apologize. I looked around and there was no hands up. There were no hands up. Okay. I am going to retract that because I did see it, but I have to recognize that there's still time left on an motion from the gentlelady from Zonia.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure that we were given an opportunity to speak on the main motion.
Okay, why don't we go ahead, Jim? I'll let you speak on the main motion.
Mr. Speaker, on the main motion, I want to say that I rise as a proud co-sponsor and supporter of Bill number 57-38, and I want to extend an undanklu na sijus Maasi to the author for not giving up on this measure and building on the work that he and his office did last term to bring this bill to the floor in the 38th Guam Legislature. And despite the misinformation and unproductive debate along the way, I wholeheartedly feel that this change in law will mean more families can stay together without undergoing the enormous headache and cost associated with building a new standalone home. ADUs are a great win-win for families who want to offer a private space for an adult child or grandparent, but cannot pursue a whole new home due to distance or cost. These accessory units also help to mitigate overdevelopment because people will be able to live on their existing footprint rather than seeking an undeveloped lot elsewhere to build on. And Mr. Speaker, I also appreciate the protections built into this measure where the government would not be allowed to permit an ADU if the property is in conformance with the mandates of this proposal, including the assurances that these new structures are not harming our aquifer. I was already on board with this bill before the amendments were made, especially given our affordable housing crisis, especially because of so many of our working adults and retired citizens have no choice but to be roommates with their parents and children. And I know that the last time Gura gave us a presentation and other housing agencies, the other agency, I think our housing shortage is anywhere between 9 and 11,000 shortages of homes here for our community. But now I want to share with you, Mr. Speaker, that this bill makes it perfectly clear that ADUs cannot add any more nitrate risk to our aquifers than existing homes built over our groundwater protection zone. And because of this and the other protections built in with this bill, I am proud to stand in support of this affordable housing solution and ask my colleagues to support the efforts. Again, this being able to work closely, we know that there is the maximum ADU specified. The ADU cannot, the ADUs will not be allowed if you cannot upgrade to the septic system to the to type 4. And of course, I know that if I'm not mistaken, ADUs are not exempt from Section 8 requirements. So I want to thank again the good author for the efforts on this measure, never giving up, and literally realizing that based on this opportunity, we can finally realize that these ADUs can literally strengthen the options for housing to our island residents. Sizos Masi.
Sizos Masi, on the main motion, on the main bill. Gentlelady from Georgia, do you want to address the Senator Chalai? Would you want to address this? Huh? Pardon me? Monday? No. Did you speak on the main motion yet? Okay. Gentleman from MIPAN, you can speak on the main motion.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by just reading into the record testimony that was submitted by Mr. Stephen Hollister, who is a board member of the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, but is submitting a comment on Bill 57 as a private citizen. I'd just like to read it into the record. My name is Steve Hollister, and I am submitting this comment on Bill 57-38 as a private citizen. I have been a resident of Guam for the past 27 years, residing in Hoggett for the last 15. My wife's family has had a presence on the island since the 1960s. I am opposed to Bill 57-38 as written for the following reasons. Number one, most importantly, increasing housing densities above the northern Lens Aquifer endangers our drinking water for future generations. Two, R1, R2, and A zones, agricultural zones, were put in place for a reason. Successful communities around the world realize the importance of green space in neighborhoods. This bill will be used to get around the zoning laws and impact the quality of life for people already living in neighborhoods and who choose a particular neighborhood to live in part because of the zoning. Three, while septic tanks are mentioned in the bill, what about insufficient government infrastructure that is already in place? My neighborhood is already plagued by spills from the government sewage system to the point that we have to leave our clearouts open to spill on the road or yards to stop sewage from backing up into the houses. At present, 2 houses are being built in our neighborhood, which will only increase the sewage running onto the street. Should there not be a provision that additional housing should only be built where the existing government infrastructure is sufficient? 4, granny houses and rooms are a thing where I grew up. My grandparents closed off a couple rooms to convert to an efficacy apartment and rent it out. However, a 1,600 square foot standalone house is not a granny house. Shoot, it's bigger than our house we live in now. And most people will not be able to afford to build one without taking out a loan and then having to charge crazy rent just to pay off the loan. Does that help the average Guam resident? 5, the winners of this bill will be realtors, bankers, and federal employees with high salaries, not the majority of us that call Guam home. We live in an interconnected natural world. What happens next door, down the street, up the hill, or above the aquifer can impact everyone. Housing is needed, but I believe there is a more responsible way of going about it. Please reconsider Bill 57-38 as presented and amend it to a bill that will truly help the many instead of enriching the few and endangering our quality of life and the natural environment of Guam. Thank you. Stephen Hollister, Hoggett. Sijos Masi, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to read that testimony into the record. Well, Bill 57 is framed as a solution to Guam's housing crisis by allowing accessory dwelling units in residential zones. The measure carries significant financial consequences that could strain public infrastructure, increase taxpayer burdens, and create economic loopholes for speculative real estate developments. Unfunded mandates on public utilities. The bill dramatically increases residential density without a clear funding mechanism to upgrade the necessary infrastructure, shifting the financial burden to Tanana, Tun Pete, Uncle Frank, and Auntie Mommy, once again. Allowing ADUs in R1, R2, and agricultural zones without proper planning could result in the Matsalapun urban sprawl I mentioned earlier. If not carefully regulated, ADUs could proliferate in an uncoordinated way if not carefully regulated. And I say that because our regulatory agencies have a hard enough time. And we kind of scratch our head and wonder what is carefully regulated. So it's easy to think that ADUs will not be carefully regulated. I also wonder about the unintended consequences for property tax revenues, because in my mind, one of the key fiscal concerns of Bill number 5738 is its impact on property tax collection. The ADUs create a tax loophole for developers. Guam's property tax system is based on assessed property value, but the bill doesn't clearly define how ADUs will be assessed. And so I did, if the author would yield to that a concern, I could frame it in a question, but I was just curious what his thoughts are on that.
Just Masi, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to address that. First of all, there's the contemplation, Mr. Speaker, because of today's construction costs and because of interest rates, Most people are not going to be liquid and have cash for these ADUs. If you think about 400 and 900 square feet, Mr. Speaker, that will have a kitchen facility, will have a toilet facility, will have a bedroom probably in a 400, and that'll be it, basically a studio apartment. And you might be able to squeeze in 2 small bedrooms in a 900 square foot. Many people on the floor today and many people out in the public, even on the radio and everywhere else, are talking about how 200 and 250 and 300 a square foot for a permitted full concrete structure. Let's just do the simple math. If it's 300 a foot for 900, that's big money. Even for the 400. Now I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to find ways to do it for less expensive, maybe not be elaborate, maybe not be in that range. But even if it was just 200 a foot, that's $80,000 for a 400 square foot ADU. And then the nitrate system that has to go in. So the belief for most people, I think rich people basically don't need ADUs because they probably have giant houses anyways. But for people who are going to eke out the dignity of a small one, chances are there's going to be a mortgage on that. And once there's a mortgage on that property is assessed and assessed a value. The value actually goes up, Mr. Speaker, which should mean more tax revenue. Besides, we have on the law, which we usually don't follow unless we're going to go to the bond market and want to have a little bit of room, a tax assessment that's supposed to be done every 3 years on Guam. Sometimes it's not done for political reasons because, man, you know, why squeeze the little guy, right? And so the bottom line is that a tax assessment is already part of our law. When the tax man comes out and assesses and they view that property and realize, hey, guess what? You have another improvement on your property. That's going to increase revenue to the government, and it's not a loophole if the government's doing its job. So there's no escape. As a matter of fact, to close on this, Mr. Speaker, my insurance rate this year, doubled for my single-family dwelling home. Why did it double? Because of the most recent assessments. And I had insurance for a mortgage that I took out 22 years ago. And the value, well, I'm not going to disclose the value, but you can see what happened. It doubled my insurance rate because I have a much higher value. Now I'm happy because that's my largest investment that I have in my life is that home that I built 22 years ago. I sure wasn't happy when I got that tax bill. And I can't wait till my mortgage is open or over so I can insure at a lower rate for replacement just to, if something catastrophic happens. So I don't buy this issue that there's an escape of tax revenue when we have on the books and on the law a 3-year assessment. And if there's a mortgage taken out against this improvement, the value goes up, which means the taxes are higher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, yeah, about that 3-year tax assessment. So instead of generating new tax revenue, this bill is going to create an enforcement headache, basically, that's going to lead to lower than expected property tax collections. The other issue that I have with the bill, but I do support the effort and the intent because I know that the former land chair worked very hard on large portions of this bill and put in a lot of good work. So I support the effort, but the issue I have is that it encourages investor-owned rentals instead of home ownership. What is the American dream, the Chamorro dream, the Guamanian dream? I never heard anyone say, I can't wait to grow up and own my own ADU. Our people can't even really afford apartments, let alone ADUs. And the bill allows ADUs to be rented for a minimum of 6 months, making them highly attractive for long-term rental investors. The sponsor of the bill just talked about rich people won't need ADUs, but in the public hearing, there are some pretty rich people who seem very interested in being able to not just build ADUs, but be able to rent them out. And so I agree with the testimony that I read into the record of Mr. Hollister's. I think who this bill actually benefits, I don't agree that it benefits the people of Guam who are trying to own a home, right? And so I would just say that this body should work harder towards establishing affordable housing, actual housing, not hobbit houses. Our people deserve better. And that's why we should totally invest and support Chamorro Land Trust home construction and infrastructure instead of deregulating rental housing for private gain. And that's what I believe this bill does. So thank you again, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to rise. I don't want to say in support of the bill, but just to kind of express some of the thoughts that I had, you know, because it's very frustrating when we have entities in our government at Guam that are actually tasked with really solving the issue of affordable housing, kind of abandoning that responsibility and going on a wild goose chase to construct a new hospital in the middle of nowhere, when the real need is for affordable houses, subdivisions, true solutions to the affordable housing crisis. So I appreciate the effort of the author, but I just wanted to share my concerns on the record, Mr. Speaker, as I think that this bill, especially with the defeated amendments, does not have enough regulation to ensure that we can pursue these developments in a way that are meaningful and protect not just our environment, but really deliver true solutions and results for people that really need them. Young people who want to grow up and own their own home, not necessarily live in a mother-in-law suite. And so thank you, Mr. Speaker, again for the opportunity to rise.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else on the bill? Gentlelady from Tumaninga Record.
Situsmasi, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there's anyone in here that understands the issue and the crisis we have with the shortage of homes. We're finding out that more people nowadays are moving into apartment buildings because it's becoming almost unaffordable to have a home. Even if you're given a house, you know, from your family members, that it's too costly sometimes for people. And I think this would have been a great bill if we just for now, allowed for these ADUs only to be on properties that have sewer infrastructure already, to protect our water and aquifer, that we put our environment first. There's a balance that we could have played in this ADU bill. But for some people, it's more like, well, it doesn't matter. You don't have the votes. You don't have the votes. And everyone is just sticking to their guns. Like, we're just going to vote for this. It doesn't matter. Great amendments that were proffered by the good lady from Barragata Heights, who's a science teacher, who knows the effects of contamination that can have on our water. One of the comments she made about, you know, even children, babies who drink water from our tap because they can't afford to buy bottled water or go to the store and get their jugs filled, that they're left with having to use faucet water. No filtration system. It's just unfortunate that there couldn't have been a balance to this. I was very happy to see the testimony from Guam Waterworks Authority, clearly spelling it out. Those who are experts in the field, those who monitor our waters every day, to explain to us there are higher levels growing of contaminants in our water. They're warning us. But the part I liked the most, actually, was this section where they said, while the real estate lobby continues to press for elimination of safeguards. That was really nice to see an agency to really recognize the push that's happening from the private sector for the sake of what? Profit? Profit over safeguards. What's in the best interest of our people and protection of our people. They actually mention the real estate lobbyists. Coming from that agency, they recognize it. It's just, it was mind-boggling because I've never seen it really in a testimony, especially coming from a utilities agency. But again, some of the amendments would have been great amendments. The bill failing to recognize the importance of our mayors and their duties and responsibilities, but most especially the respect of our mayors that we should give them, that was disregarded. Of all things, justifying the overcrowded parking. Saying, oh no, it's not going to be crowded. I mean, we're dealing with that already in most areas. So no, this bill doesn't strike a balance, and it doesn't strike a protection of our future. Some people just can't seem to see what's in front of them, and definitely cannot see what's for the future. That's our responsibility to do that, but unfortunately, it's turning a blind eye. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, anybody else wishing to speak on the bill? On the bill, anybody else wishing to speak on the bill? Gentle lady from Zonia.
Just Mossy, Mr. Speaker. This bill, as we know, had gone through our process last term. At that time, the bill as originally introduced when we had a public hearing, it was pointed out immediately up front, and this was by a realtor, Mr. John Duenas, that while the purpose of the bill is noble, the implementation and operation of its specific sections as written creates a slippery slope which is highly corruptible, which will serve to defeat the original purpose of the R1 zone. He says it points to the need to provide more provisions that will set guardrails to assure the ADUs meet the intended purpose and not just another way to make money by creating duplexes in R1 zones. We really took that to heart. And as you know, this bill was substituted by the committee to include some of these guardrails that we could find, and particularly from Hawaii, because Hawaii looked to ADUs like Guam is saying we are looking to ADUs. This is going to solve our housing crisis, but it created other crises for them. And that's why they put in even more guardrails. And we need to learn from them, learn from other jurisdictions that I think it was one of my colleagues from Totu that said at the public hearing, we do not want to create a backdoor for slums. Even Gura pointed that out to us, and that's everybody's concern. People can rezone their properties right now from R1 to R2 to want to increase, or they could add rooms right now without any changes to the law. But this law, as we have in front of us, to create ADUs, and many people keep saying this is for my relative, that's not what this bill does. The bill is not restricted to relatives, and that's a big thing. So the bill is to allow you to build another unit for rental. It's a money maker for property owners, which I don't object to, but if that's what we're weighing versus polluting our aquifer, it's a whole different consideration. And I think we can build ADUs without exacerbating GWA or the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, who we have charged and who are charging us, the people of Guam, thousands of dollars, millions, billions, but for each individual or business owner, thousands. That's because of the already existing contamination, the consent decrees that they are under to fix these contaminations. And we have already, as a body, exacerbated that by allowing on parental subdivisions septic tanks, which increases the density. We already did that. We made a huge exception. And this is another exception to double again the amount of dwellings on half-acre lots with only septic tanks, without sewers. And we could make this bill, I think, a win-win by requiring it where there are sewers. Neither GWA nor EPA has a problem. They say go for it. They said we have some non-conforming ADUs already. In other words, multi-family dwellings that are supposed to be single-family dwellings because of our economy. So we need to solve these problems, yes. But those are putting a strain on all the other taxpayers or water consumer, water payers, because of the burden that not complying puts on our systems that we are all going to pay. It's very clear, GWA makes it very clear that their plans are, they are under consent decree. That means order from the court to stop the contamination and to do all kinds of things to stop the contamination. Part of that is to bring in more sewer while they plug up the holes in the sewer that's leaking and do so many other things. And they're going to reroute our sewer now into a whole other system to clean it out of, to clean the PFAS contamination out of it. I'm sorry, that's not even our sewer. It's our, well, yes it is. But I think we are also having that same problem in our wells, our drinking water. And that's what I agree with them. I agree with Mr. Hollister from EPA. I agree with all of them. Mr. Duenas, why not just make the ADUs so that they don't create that extra strain? When we can do that perfectly today, we can pass an ADU bill that doesn't strain further our aquifer today. The bill, when we had the public hearing, even Gura pointed out a couple things. Oh, sorry. And they said, there's a big loophole in this bill. Because while the bill says it should be one of the units, either the primary residence or the accessory dwelling, the ADU, is going to be occupied by the family. But the way the bill's written, that's not required at all. It says it allows for a designated authorized representative. That means instead of me occupying the house, I can designate the realtor to be my designated representative, or anyone to be my representative to live in that house. That's one rental, and then there's a second house, that's a second rental. So we're creating a rental industry, But the way the bill's written, we're creating that industry while putting our aquifer at risk, when we don't need to do that. Now, I know that this property owners is required in Hawaii. They're very strict, and they use this language, designated authorized representative. And I brought up at the hearing that I think it's a mistake in the transcription from the Hawaii, that it's supposed to be, if the property owner can't stay in that property himself because of severe illness, an unforeseen illness, or active military deployment, that's the only time they get to designate an authorized representative. That's the only time. Not any time, like the bill currently reads. So that's another protection out the door where I just wish they would say, we're changing R1s to R2s, because it's not for grannies and it's not for aunties, it's not for my person with a disability, not at all. It's for anyone, it's for rentals. I think the limit in here is 6 months, but there's a limit, I think, because we're trying not to make it be. This is the same reason why we have laws against doing Airbnbs in your neighborhood without giving the residents notice or following all the strict guidelines, because it puts a strain in R1 zones, R1 residential neighborhoods, that commercial activity. But what really is disappointing is that EPA has reviewed this bill several times, and they're very consistent. If it's not going to be a sewer, then there has to be, there's going to be a strain. But we are absolutely ignoring that. And then they say 60 days, it's not just EPA, but also GURA, who said that 60 days is an impediment. 60 days default approval is an impediment for these agencies to give the people of Guam the protections that they deserve. So while we all want housing, we didn't go out and rezone every R1 to an R2, because that would bypass all protections in what had already been planned in those zones. The infrastructure, everything, the traffic. So all they ask is that we give them 120 days to review these applications. 120 days, that's all. That's a mandatory deadline. I think that's adequate. I think that's no harm to anyone in here who wants to create their businesses with the ADUs on their property. Good for you. But that doesn't mean that we need to contaminate our aquifers, further put pressure on EPA, who has tremendous pressure right now, I am so sure, to temper down their testimony. That even one of the directors is writing in on his own. Same thing with GWA, it looks like. We have a CCU member writing in on his own. They are concerned. They are concerned that we are not concerned. And why are we not concerned? For those people who are relying on us to be concerned for them. This is where it stops. It stops here. We are their protection. When we pass a law that says, EPA, you have to do it, they're going to do it. They can't protect us anymore because our law allowed it. So again, I think there's some very easy fixes to this bill, that some of them were already proposed, such as requiring sewer if it's over the groundwater aquifer. If it's over, it's called the groundwater protection zone. That's not the entire north, it's the groundwater protection zone, the most critical areas that we need to protect. And we're supposed to all be on the same page when it comes to protecting these things. Not like, EPA, why aren't you doing your job? Why do we have contamination? And then we keep passing things that are gonna continue to exacerbate the contamination problems. And I'm begging for those people who thought sunscreen was a contamination to our coral reefs to witness this, that we are purposely going to allow higher densities, higher impact on our non-sewered areas, meaning aquifer areas. I did have one amendment that I'd like to propose. Again, it's a different amendment, Mr. Speaker. This is page 8, lines 1 through 3, is to amend subsection 19 on page 8.
Timestamp 10:35 a.m.
10:34 a.m., yeah.
Can you read your amendment?
Yes. So my amendment, my amendment is going to strike the word and replace it with or. All right? So right now, subsection 19 says lots zoned in an R1 zone shall be limited to 1 detached or 1 attached ADU. I thank the sponsor for that clarification. I like that part. It goes on to say lots zoned in an A or R2 zone shall be limited to 1 detached ADU. And I want to change and 1 attached ADU to or 1 attached ADU. Changing the and to an or makes the maximum requirement of just 1 ADU on even an A or an R2 property. And as we talked about earlier on an earlier amendment, this is because they are allowing septic tanks only. And if we had sewers, it might be different. But if it's going to allow septic tanks, then I think we should restrict them to 1, and that's something very minimal that we can do to help EPA here and help GWA and help us, help our people.
On the amendment, good Senator from Tamuning.
Si just Masi, Mr. Speaker, while I disagree with a number of the talking points, I'll do it on my close earlier. But I support this amendment. And I support this amendment because that's what we did in the other section of law. For those people in the community now who have property that's in greater proportion of a half acre, and they're on agricultural or they're on R2, yeah, they can have another ADU as long as they have the adequate property. One thing I want to clear up though, Mr. Speaker, got to be careful how we use our language and misrepresent the bill. It's not just with septic tanks. Actually, since we did the great amendment in this bill to require the type 4 nitrate reduction system, to continue to say septic tanks is wrong, because that's not what's in the bill. We amended the bill with that amendment that was supported by the former CCU chairman, Joey Duenas. I don't know of the other CCU member because I haven't seen any testimony from any other CCU member so far here. I didn't see any in the committee report. I didn't see. The best one that I saw was the former chairman, Joey Duenas, telling us to do this in unsewered areas. Make sure now that we've adopted the type 4 system for nitrates, we do it. I'll talk about PFAS in my closing. But I agree with this amendment because actually all it's doing is chewing up the amendment that we passed for the ADUs only over the GPZ with type 4 nitrate reduction system on a half acre. And so, we all know agricultural and R2 multifamily, they tend to be larger pieces and parcels of property. So, have at it in terms of meeting the requirement of, you're going to need an acre to be able to build 2. So I support the amendment, Mr. Speaker. But let's be clear. This is not just sewer systems. This is now the law. If it is enacted into law, it's going to be the type 4 nitrate reduction system.
Thank you very much, Senator. On the amendment, any other senator wishing to speak on the amendment?
Point of information, I'm reading GEPA's testimony, and they very clearly say even the nitrate 4, they refer to as septic tanks themselves.
Would you like to speak?
I would, Mr.
Okay.
Speaker, sorry. Thank you for the opportunity to rise in support of the amendment. It's almost like potato, it's a nitrate reducing septic tank. I mean, come on. But one thing it doesn't reduce is the PFAS. And I'm curious to hear if we have members in this body who think that PFAS is some kind of fairy tale. It's actually very real. And to insinuate or otherwise try to balabola the people that it's not.
Senator, stick to the amendment.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting there, Mr. Speaker.
No, stick to it now.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you.
So I support the amendment because, we talk about how we have to be careful with the language. Here's an example, because before this amendment, it allows for one detached and one attached, which is 2, and I thought we were only allowing 1. So thank you to the good, gentle lady from Jotnya. I think that's the first time in history those words have been put together like that. But definitely support the amendment and agree with a lot of the comments from the good senator from Jotnya as well. Sidos Masi, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. On the amendment. On the amendment. Nobody else wants to speak to the amendment? Senator, there is no objection. Would you want to close? You got 28 seconds.
Sidos Masi, Mr. Speaker. Yes, on the amendment, I'd just like to thank my colleagues who rose in support of it, and ask again my colleagues to please, I hope we get consensus on this one.
There's no objection.
Oh, okay.
Okay? All right. Okay. On the amendment, no objection. Motion carries.
Sidos Masi, on the bill itself, I want to support ADUs. We all support ADUs. We all recognize the housing problem. But that doesn't mean we turn our blind eyes to GWA's pleas and EPA's pleas saying we are going to contaminate our aquifer beyond their ability to mitigate, to manage, or to rectify that. And we, though our people are going to pay more in the end, it's us, not those people renting. They're not going to pay it. We're all going to pay it as a community on the other side of it, when we're going to pay for the mitigation that has to occur to prevent contamination, or because we have exacerbated contamination. These are facts, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
So,
On the bill.
Sidos Masi, it's very sad that we pass that opportunity.
Thank you. On the bill, the gentle lady from Barragata. Yes, ma'am.
Sidos Masi, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to support Bill 5738 COR. And I thank the sponsors for bringing this forward at a time when housing is not just a topic of debate. It is a crisis facing real families in our island community. Mr. Speaker, we've heard from constituents across Guam, parents, young couples, our manamkus, veterans, and hardworking families who simply cannot find a place to live that they can afford. This bill, while not a silver bullet, it's not the most perfect, and it's been debated for hours and hours. It is practical, scalable, step toward providing more housing options, and more importantly, it gives our people the power to build housing solutions within their own properties. This bill authorizes the construction of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, in residential zones. These are small secondary homes, granny flats, as it was called earlier many times over, in-law suites, backyard cottages, whatever you want to call them. But the truth is, they're already part of our island tradition. Multi-generational living is how many of us were raised. Adding an ADU to a home isn't a new idea for our culture. It's an extension of our values. What this bill does is provide a clear legal path to allow families to build those extra units safely, efficiently, and in accordance with zoning and building standards. No more guessing, no more uncertainty. Homeowners who want to support their elders, accommodate their grown children, or earn extra income through a long-term rental can now do so with the confidence that the law supports them. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, this isn't just about buildings. It's about keeping families together, giving them choices, and giving them dignity. And for those who may worry about the impact on neighborhoods, I say this: the bill includes clear provisions that protect the character of residential areas. It ensures that units must comply with existing safety, infrastructure, and environmental regulations. It doesn't allow for uncontrolled growth. It allows for smart, responsible development. Let me also address the economic aspect. ADUs are a low-cost way to add housing. They don't require new subdivisions or massive government infrastructure projects. They let private citizens be part of the solution. They can also help middle-class families cope with rising mortgage payments or utility costs by renting out a small unit in their backyard. That's real help for working families. Let's not forget our Manamcos. Many of them want to age in place, near family, but with some independence. ADUs give them that option. They also create opportunities for young professionals to stay close to their support systems while saving for a home of their own. I understand there are concerns, infrastructures, parking, density. These are valid points. But this bill does not ignore those. It calls for proper permitting, compliance with building codes, and coordination with our agencies to make sure that implementation is done the right way. The alternative is to do nothing. And that's not acceptable when our people are living in cars, in crowded homes, or paying rent that they cannot afford. I would rather do something. This bill reflects the kind of policy we should be proud to pass. It's cost-effective, community-oriented, and culturally appropriate for our island. It gives homeowners more tools to care for their families and meet their real needs. It brings us closer to solving Guam's housing crisis. It gives options, not by waiting for some massive project to come along, but by empowering our people to be part of a solution. So today, I urge my colleagues, let's support Bill number 5738 COR. Support the families who want to build something better, not just for themselves, but for their loved ones, for the future of this island. Let's say yes to hope. Let's say yes to housing. Let's say yes to something affordable and attainable. Let's say yes to Guam. Sedus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Calvo. Senator Gumatautau, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of Bill 57-38 COR as amended. As one of the sponsors of this measure, I did so fully cognizant of the impacts to not only the critical housing issues facing our people, but as a way to help our struggling economy through the creation of additional and conceivably more affordable housing accommodations. Accessory dwelling units are intended to help increase affordable housing options for our U.S. territory, for our families, while helping to perhaps at some point to generate a supplemental income source for homeowners, particularly at a time when working families can use a little help in the face of rising costs for food, healthcare, and other essentials. Mr. Speaker, housing prices remain high in our part of the world, and with this legislation, we acknowledge our collective need to expand Guam's housing supply, to reduce prices, and to some greater extent, use this policy at some point to combat homelessness. No question that Guam has a housing problem. Rental or for sale, affordable or market rate. This situation affects residents across the board. Mr. Speaker, our families. This is not a new issue. The shortage of housing has been an ongoing concern for both the legislature and the public for decades. While Bill 57-38 COR opens the door to increasing housing supply, building ADUs is not a simple or inexpensive endeavor. Homeowners will, in fact, face significant costs associated with hiring contractors, securing materials, protecting our environment, as we spent much of the day discussing, and paying for the labor to make this all possible. It will take some time, very valuable time, to get these projects done for our families, whether it be completing the building permit applications or standard inspections through Guam's regulatory system. It's been said that over the years, actions or a lack of action has let negative economic forces run out of control. It may have stalled a judgment day, Mr. Speaker, but we no longer have that luxury. We are out of time. Bill 57-38 COR is an approach by this legislature that directly addresses our housing crisis head on. And with it, Guam can turn its housing challenges into opportunities for growth and equity for our families. I want to thank the author, Senator Chris Duenas, for his leadership, Mr. Speaker, on this issue. I want to thank the committee for their work with not only the public hearing and getting community input on this important measure, but also in the markup process to make it to this point today. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the chance to add my comments to the discussions today on this bill. This is Masi.
You're welcome, Senator. On the bill, any other colleague would like to speak on the bill? Gentleman from Sinai, Mr. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of Bill 57-38 COR. This has been a long process, as I introduced it in the last legislature, previous terms ago, and you know, it's just finally coming down to fruition where this is going to move forward, and hopefully that our people out there will be able now to house their families in a separate dwelling, but yet still within their home. You know, every day I pass by the park, and on my way into the park, I wave to the folks over there. They wave back. You know, I want to see them be able to get back to their families and be a part again of a family that is loving and caring. And perhaps maybe, just maybe, this may be an opportunity for them to get back there because they're able now to live in a home separate from the home. So I thank my colleague from Tamuning for moving this forward in the 38th. And I ask my colleagues for their support as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. On the bill, as amended, any other colleague wishing to speak on the bill? On the bill. Gentleman from Tamuning, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too rise in support of this bill. As the gentleman from Sinahanya had spoken, it's a bill that he worked on. I personally witnessed, of course, the previous legislature, hardworking senator from Tamuning, who's my office mate. And 3 years now that I've witnessed him work on this bill. And every once in a while I would join him in his meetings with constituents that would come in regarding this bill. I have yet to have seen anybody come in regarding this bill that has a lot of money. As a matter of fact, most of them who come to the office supporting this mechanism, they're saying, you know, we don't have the money either, but my son and my daughter, they just got married. Our incomes together can possibly do this. So when they say it's just ADU for Nana, to be honest with you, the majority of the people that come in, this one bedroom or this studio is going to be their house. Because they can't afford to buy property and to build even a 2 or 3 bedroom house. And the last thing they're inquiring about is, I mean, I haven't heard them say, well, you know, and if they move out, I get to rent it. This is a necessity for them. A few of them come in because they want their kids to come back to Guam. They have saved up some money, but not quite enough to buy their own properties. But inquiring about whether or not their property was big enough to put in an ADU to house them. So I've got nothing against rich people having it as well. You know, we often talk about one Guam. You have money or not. But to be honest with you, again, what I see and the folks that were really inquiring about this in the past 3 years now, it's out of necessity for their families. We often say, what can we do to bring our families back? Individuals' families are trying to work to get their families back. And some of them are having to resort to something like this because they want to come back, but they don't have enough money to buy property or have it surveyed and go through the building permit and the cost of building a 2 or 3 bedroom home nowadays. And the one thing this bill does as well, Mr. Speaker, is, you know, we gotta, I like ostriches and putting our heads in the sand, that there are no ADUs right now. I wonder how many of these ADUs are incompliant and are legal. This bill allows those ADUs to come in compliant with Guam law. allows them to come in compliant. Because we recognize that there are a lot of ADUs out there that are not in compliant as well. This bill allows them to come in compliant, and in order for them to come in compliant, the mechanism is there to be able to do so. So that being said, I'm happy and I'm glad to have co-signed to this. And again, working with my colleague, my office mate, and the folks that he's been working with, the individual families that he's been working with, I've been glad to meet and talk to and share their conditions, their plight. I want to thank again, the author. And it's the right thing to do. You know, we're not doing this to do the wrong thing. We're doing this to make sure things are done right. In the past, things were being done wrong. We want to correct what has been wrong. And until the government can put in all the infrastructure that it has promised its people to do so, this is the right thing to do now. Now, when the government is able to afford to put the infrastructure in there to all the homes, then you know, this will become moot. But until such a time, we're trying to do the right thing, the best that we can, because the government at this point is failing its people. And this is a mechanism, again, try to do things right until the government can afford to put in this infrastructure for what we foresee in the very near future. With that, Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I want to thank the author again for allowing me to be a co-sponsor of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're very welcome. On the bill as amended, any other senators wishing to speak on the bill? On the bill, 3 times. Author of the bill, you are allowed to close.
Titus Masi, Mr. Speaker. It's been a long journey, and I want to say that I have respected the discourse on the floor. While I disagree with a number of representations that I'll address in this closing, I do not diminish in any way the thoughts and the feelings of those who have concerns and reservations. So I'll now go into the things that I disagree with in my closing. But before I do that, as the retiring speaker just said, one of the most impressive individuals that I have met through my journey of correcting the injustice of dissident estates that were treated wrongly by court order to not be allowed to have the value of parental subdivision, Mr. John Santos and his wife and his beautiful daughter with special needs. When they came to testify on the nitrate reduction system bill to be placed on dissident estates to try to ensure that we have more protections in place and undo an injustice, he was actually basically testifying on an ADU bill. Because he said once he's going to be able to realize that dream in his Odut Salampago property of over 1/2 acre, approximately 2,200 square meters, well in excess. He said, my dream is to build a small house for my wife and myself, but my dream is also to build an ADU for my daughter who's disabled, who we have to take care of for life. And he wants to move closer to the north because they have a beautiful home in Hagat. Because from time to time, he needs to rush his disabled daughter to the hospital for some episodes that take place, and he wants to be closer. And he's had this other property in his family ever since. It's family property. But when their parents passed away, unfortunately, the situation existed the way it did. And so for Mr. Santos, this is for you as well, when you can realize that dream. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure our greedy realtors are listening. And I know they take offense because they took offense when the decedent estate issue was being settled for justice. They were called greedy realtors. Only out for themselves and only out for money. And I'm sure they've heard the testimony on this floor and will take umbrage with those who have classified them as greedy realtors. Mr. Speaker, the ADUs in non-regulatory or non-compliance, that's a regulatory issue. Mr. Speaker, John Duenas and Gar came down and their testimony on this bill was in full support. In fact, John Duenas himself was the one who helped me prepare the amendments that I proffered on this floor. He helped me prepare the amendments on this floor because he wants to make sure that GWA has no more excuse when it comes to those 2,000 residents who are not hooked up to sewer right now that are 200 feet and 50 feet within that area. And that they're committed to 1 ADU and a half acre with the most advanced technology we have in the nitrate reduction system. Now, let me go to PFAS, Mr. Speaker. PFAS, we're blaming the little guy. The truth is, there is no empirical evidence, there is no scientific evidence that the nitrate or that the PFAS is highly exacerbated by septic systems. PFAS predominantly is from industrial areas. Fire foam that was used for many, many years to put out fires.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker. There was a federal team here on island to look into this PFAS issue with Guam Waterworks Authority.
Thank you very much.
Just for the record, it's not a fairy tale, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I appreciate it. Guys, colleagues, we tend to use point of information, point of order very loosely. This is a debate. Okay, the process is a debate. You may not like what is being said. I understand, and I understand. Thank you. Proceed.
John Duenas is a professional engineer. John Duenas has asked them for the empirical evidence that it is becoming exacerbated by septic tanks. That is the truth. And John Duenas will ask on the record, and he has asked on the record in this hall. But it is no question about the industrial areas, fire foam that used to be used, even common products that we have today, and the massive broken system within GWA of broken sewer pipes, which have yet to be addressed. And wells co-located within 100 feet from sewer systems, sewer pipes that are broken. So a lot of times when it comes to the contamination of the water itself, it's because low pressure and sewage seeps into it. That was Tawut. That was the multi-million-dollar construction in Tawut when it had Hanum Taki. And I even boiled the water because I built my house in Sinohania 22 years ago and I had that problem. And it looked dark with miso soup, it looked like. If I put onions, that's what it would look like. The tofu was already there. I took pictures and I showed it to them. I talked to John Anderson, the late great, when he was on the radio. You know what happened afterwards? 2 days later, I was taking a shower. I don't even need to clean the shower anymore because there's so much chlorine. They rushed up there and they super over-chlorinated all of those several where me and the good friend of mine from Sinohania and Afami stay, besides my place in Tamuning. He knows about this. Those are the issues that are on the table to be fixed by GWA right now. Mayor's report. I respect the heck out of mayors, and I'll go talk to them. The fact is, there's a permit requirement whenever you're building anything. It's not a secret. And if somebody passed away in an ADU in Hawaii and nobody knew, it would have already been notified to the mayor because it was completed. They died in an ADU in Hawaii. If that happened on Guam, they would know because it was already built and occupied, which means the mayor would know. So, Mr. Speaker, all of these representations, and I want to just finish by going to Mr. Hollister's concerns. I cannot believe Mr. Hollister is not outraged. He is a board member of RENA and EPA, and you mean to tell me there's sewage that's dumping out every single time? And he hasn't screamed to high heaven and made sure that they get down there and fix that post haste. To say they have to leave their home? Mr. Hollister, you are an EPA board member. You should immediately have an injunction on that and make sure that gets taken care of post haste. The other misrepresentation, it looks like dated testimony from Mr. Hollister's. There is no 1,200 square feet ADU anymore in this bill. There is no 1,600 square foot ADU in this bill that's bigger than his house. While I appreciate and respect the testimony from Mr. Hollister on these two issues, I'm like, come on, man. I mean, heaven and earth should be moving out there when you're telling me you got sewage spilling as a threat to your family. And then like, shame on EPA. Shame on anyone who allows that to happen and say that's the reason why. And I close with this point, Mr. Speaker, because this is the one that gets in my craw the most. I don't know how many times I've been approached quietly by either a CCU member or somebody else saying, hey man, you know, fix Guam first. And I'm thinking to myself, once again, the little guy who just wants to eke out a small, dignified place on their property is the reason for all the lack of infrastructure improvement, is the reason for the problems. And you got to put your hand on the little guy and tell him, no, wait until we fix Guam first. No wonder why we have so many people that said to heck with it and have moved off island in areas where they don't have that kind of pressure on them, the little guy, to just live a dignified life with a roof over their head. Even if it's mandikiki duendes, like one of my colleagues said. I'd rather have duendes than todza. I'd rather be able to be in my ADU Kumamoto Typhoon than Idzoku Shack. At least I can protect my belongings and my family. Tudus Masi, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to close. And at this time, I make a motion to move Bill 5738 into the third reading voting file. Tudus Masi.
Thank you. There is a motion. Is it 5738 as amended, Senator?
As amended, Mr. Speaker. And further amended on the floor.
Thank you. There is a motion to move Bill 57-38 COR as amended by the committee and further amended on the floor into the third reading file. There is an objection? There is an objection to that motion. Therefore, all those in favor of moving 57-38 COR as amended by committee and further amended on the floor to the third reading file, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. Colleagues, it is 10 minutes to 5. Let's take a 1-minute recess. Okay. 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 Back in session. Majority Leader, can you make a notwithstanding motion? Majority Leader, can you make a notwithstanding motion to reorder the agenda for us to be able to hear the resolution 7-38 before we? Majority Leader, you're
Yeah,
recognized.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding House rules, I'd like to reorder the resolution number 78, or 7-38 COR. I move them up in place of, to switch the order of what is now Bill number 10, to switch the order of those bills. I move that we do that at this point.
So the motion is notwithstanding to move resolution number 7-38
COR.
COR in, above into the 10th spot,
Bill 58-38 COR.
and then move 5838 behind.
Yes, where resolution number 7-38 COR is at this point.
So then
Switch
tomorrow.
switch places, yes.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda would be
Resolution, yeah, 7-38 COR.
Okay, on that motion, any objections? No objections, so ordered. Majority Leader, on as far as recess until motion? 9? 9. Just recess until.
Mr. Speaker, I move to motion recess till tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
On the motion, recess tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Any objections? No objections, so ordered. See you at 9 a.m., gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen.